Hey everybody, it is great to see you, great to be with you today. Excited for another edition of Parents in the Bible. And this week is certainly going to be interesting. It covers many of our favorite topics. Number one being, is favoritism okay? Should you have a favorite kid? And the answer hopefully will surprise you, but I think the content is pretty fascinating. And so if you haven't already, we've posted two other videos just kind of about biblical parenting, and I think it's been interesting and fascinating. I've personally never kind of taken the approach of looking at famous people in the Bible and then thought about their parents, and so I think it'll be fun. We'll continue to pump out content as long as there's interest and as long as they're available. So this week we are looking into the parents and the parental kind of relationships of Joseph. And Joseph is an interesting story. If you grew up in church, or maybe you've just kind of seen some movies about it, Joseph is the kid who received a mini-colored coat or a technicolored coat. That's kind of what he was known for. And ultimately he basically became famous because he saved the nation of Egypt through his just incredible administrative skills and was able to store up food when a time of famine came. But before that, there's a lot of backstory, and I think it makes, it fills out the picture a little more completely, fills in a little bit of the details, and just makes for an interesting person. So Joseph, his father's name was Jacob, and Jacob is a very famous person within the Old Testament and certainly within Israel's history. When you hear the phrase, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's who it's talking about. It's talking about his dad. His dad did many things, was a part of many incredible events in Scripture. His father was Isaac. Isaac, also another famous character in Scripture, and then his grandfather was Abraham, as in Father Abraham had many sons. I mean, that type of fame. I mean, it is really kind of a big deal, certainly top tier. And so Jacob, all of his kids became the leaders or representatives of, I think, 10 of them of the 12 tribes of Israel. So big deal, lots of history for their family, an incredible legacy of faith, an incredible legacy of God showing up in their life. But once again, simply because God is showing up in your life does not mean your life is going to be perfect, or the lives of the people that you influence. And so that's the story. Joseph's mother's name was Rachel, and she is described as the woman whom Jacob loved. And Joseph had two wives, but Rachel was the one that he loved. And he had concubines, which he also had children with them. But he had two wives, and Rachel was his favorite, which is a pretty terrible thing to have. Favorites in general, definitely to have a favorite wife. Multiple wives is problematic for many reasons, but that was just kind of the situation. And so Rachel had two children, Joseph being one of them. And Joseph also was the youngest of all of Jacob's kids. So he had a whole bunch of kids. He had 13 total kids, I believe 8 sons, and Joseph was the favorite. So you can already see the problems that are going to start spilling out. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 2, it says that Jacob loved him more than any of his other sons. Just straight up, it was just known. It was public knowledge. And one of the reasons is because he's his youngest son. I think he just probably got kind of tired, had a bunch of older sons, invested in them, and kind of went through all the trials and tribulations of, raising his first kind of couple of kids. And then as they got older, became more independent, be able to kind of work around and take care of the flocks and all that they were doing. Basically what happened is by the time Joseph came around, he seemed to have stopped admonishing or correcting him. And he became, kind of known as the dreamer. And that was one of his traits. He's described as a dreamer. You could probably think of him as a creative type, very kind of caught up within his feelings, very emotive, all of those things. And so he didn't have to work as hard as his brothers. And he was the favorite, and the dad was, tired of disciplining, so probably gave him free passes, where the older siblings, said, man, Dad was way more intense when we were younger. If you have multiple siblings, or maybe within your own family, cousins and things like that, you have seen the difference between the way the older kids are parented versus the younger ones. It's just a reality. It's brutal. It's certainly not right, but it's just kind of how it goes. And so Joseph was a dreamer, and so he had these dreams. So he got the coat, which would have been frustrating because everybody else is like, why is he getting really nice stuff? We never had nice things like this, so he gives him this coat. But Joseph also had these dreams, and essentially the gist of these two dreams is Joseph gets elevated, and his brothers and his entire family are bowing down to him, are showing homage and respect to him. And so this would have been made it infinitely even worse. Even his dad, after he tells him one of his dreams, is like, we're going to worship you? Like, this seems highly, highly suspect. So it tells a story. The older brothers were off with the flocks, and Joseph was on his way to meet them later. He probably got to sleep in and do all this stuff. Who knows exactly what he was doing. And by the time he finds his brothers, as he's approaching them from far away, they see him, and they basically are like, great, here comes the dreamer. I'm sure he's going to insult us in some way or tell us more about how we're going to serve him. And the brothers decide, hey, we should kill him. Pretty intense. Pretty, that situation escalated quickly kind of type moment for them. And so they talk about killing him, and Reuben, who is the firstborn of Jacob, the oldest, the wisest, hopefully, says, no, let's not kill him. What if we just throw him in this pit or in this cistern, this big hole? Let's just throw him in there, and then we can kind of figure out what we want to do with him. And so, Joseph gets there, they strip him of his robe, they throw him in the hole, and he's the youngest, so I'm sure he experienced some kind of bullying and all of those good things that come with having older siblings. And so while he's sitting in there, his brothers are plotting, like, what should we do with him? Should we kill him? Why should we do that? And Reuben is like, listen, I'm as frustrated and as annoyed with him. I think he's the worst too. But we probably shouldn't kill him. And so his idea of throwing him in the pit was really a strategy to like slow this whole thing down. Well, he had another brother whose name was Judah. And Judah's idea was, let's not kill him. Let's make it look like we killed him, but let's sell him. Sell him as a slave to get rid of him. He talks about being our master. He talks about kind of being over us, but let's sell him as a slave. And so what they do is they passing tribe, kind of a traveling nomadic kind of tribe is passing by, and so they sell Joseph to him as a slave. And then they take his robe and they tear it and they put some animal blood on it and they return it to their father and say, we don't know what happened. We just found his robe. He's dead. And it's terrible. And it says that Jacob went into great mourning and could just not be consoled for obvious reasons. And 37 ends with Joseph being sold into slavery to the passing tribe, who then goes to Egypt and sells him to Potiphar, who was the captain of the guard for the Pharaoh. And so Joseph is sold into slavery into this home. And then from there, throughout Genesis, you see Joseph's stature growing. He continues to have dreams. God uses those dreams, and eventually he's elevated to the second most powerful person in Egypt. So an amazing story of redemption. But we won't jump into that. I highly recommend reading it. But we'll just continue to kind of look at the parenting. So for obvious reasons, a number of things are going wrong. But the one thing I really want to focus on is what happens when we have favoritism. What happens when we show favoritism towards our kids or really towards anyone? And what happens when you do it is that you tend to take the pressure off. You tend to take your foot off the gas. You tend to, stop asking the question why as much. They're my favorite. They're fine. They're going to be okay. I had a friend's mom who would always say she doesn't have any, her favorite kid was the dog. And that's nice. That's kind of an easy way to kind of take the pressure off if your kids ever ask that. But if you do show favoritism towards anyone or anything, and especially your kids, they're going to acknowledge it, they're going to understand it, and they're going to realize really quickly that they can get away with maybe things that they shouldn't. And maybe if you don't have a bunch of kids, even if you have just one kid, you can show favoritism towards your kid instead of your spouse. And that's a whole other issue in and of itself. And so Jacob is showing favoritism towards Joseph, and it shows up in his kids' lives. It shows up in the way that they want to treat him. I hope you have not experienced your kids wanting to kill each other. But perhaps you have. But to some degree in this story, when you see favoritism, you really see that Jacob, who has an incredible legacy and story of faith and God showing up in their lives, you see him backing off his kids. And you really see the splash zone of sin, the collateral damage of sin showing up in all of his kids' lives, and it really is just kind of this tragedy. And so one point of application I would say is that we have to instill values early and often. Even if you have one kid or if you have 10 kids, if you're influencing one young person's life, or you're a teacher or something and you have all kinds of people paying attention to you, repetition and consistency are essential. Repetition and consistency are so important. Right now, we've started to read through The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the entire series. And so we just finished the first book, The Magician's Nephew. And, my kids are 4, almost 5, and 6, almost 7. So I think at that age, it's kind of an appropriate one. And so we've walked through the story. There's a little bit of slow parts, but in general, they kind of understand it. And so it's great with Tucker and Coral, before bedtime, we can read a chapter or two before bedtime, and it's great, and they're loving it, and they're soaking it up, and just the way that C.S. Lewis really teaches us these lessons about God, through this fictional story. But we still have Gwen, and Gwen's bedtime is earlier, and everything's just a little bit different. And so for me, I'm already thinking, okay, I'm gonna have to be intentional to either reread this book with all the kids, or maybe even just reread it with her. I mean, that may be what I end up having to do, because repetition and consistency are essential. I can buy into the lie. I can buy into the idea. They'll just kind of pick it up because we're teaching and doing it. She'll pick up these ideas and these understandings, or maybe even better, my kids will teach them. And while I want that to be true, I still have to be intentional and really investing and pouring into each of my kids. One, in a way that works best for them, but also just consistently. I can't think, okay, because I prayed with Tucker, Coral's going to pick that up and Gwen's going to pick it up. I have to be intentional, really about discipling them in that way. And it's interesting because 37 ends with him being sold into slavery, and then really chapter 38 tells the story of Judah, one of Jacob's other kids, one of Joseph's brothers, and really just this incredibly tragic story of moral failure, sin, duplicity, and overall just ungodly behavior, where Judah does these incredibly terrible things. And you really, if you step back or if you just looked at this chapter by itself, you'd think, does this guy know God at all? I mean, he really just seems to kind of be doing whatever he wants. And it's just this really frustrating, kind of really sad reality. And so you see that there's this clear evidence of this behavioral drift. There's this clear evidence that as Jacob has raised his kids, something has shifted from within his own life and within the parenting, that as it gets further down, he stops raising his kids in a consistent way. And once again, I've said it every video, simply because you love God and you're following after him does not mean your life is going to be perfect and free from problems, nor your kids' lives. So please just hear that I'm not saying his kids made bad decisions because he was sinful, or whichever. But we can certainly learn parenting principles. And so even though we have Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, who no one is off limits to wild kids, and no one gets a pass from discipling your kids. And this is hard and this is scary, and I know every parent who listens to this is just thinking, yeah, I don't want my kids to end up screwed up, and there is no way to kind of fireproof yourself from this. But I believe that if we are consistent with our instruction and consistent with our discipleship and consistent with our parenting and really fighting the urge to sow favoritism, I believe I believe God will bless the way that our kids are raised, the way they behave, and ultimately the way that they feel and their relationship with him. And so even though at the end God certainly uses Joseph's story in a powerful way to not only save his family, but really says the entire kind of region, the entire localized world at that point, I still believe that we have lessons to learn. And so I hope this encourages you. As always, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and also feel free to comment. If you guys want to let us know more topics you'd want to cover, we certainly want to do that. But as always, thanks for watching. I pray it encourages you, and I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.